30 minutes out of Munich in the city of Dachau, and more specifically right here at the Dachau concentration camp, a major symbol of one of the most horrific, if not the most horrific genocide in history. Actually, it is considered the most devastating genocide in history with, of course, death count, and that is the Holocaust, which estimates, although numbers can be extremely distorted because of all the horrifying occurrences that happened in many of the death camps, but they project, historians, that about 10 million people, over 10 million people, lost their lives during the Holocaust. Essentially, Dachau concentration camp was a center concentration camp during this horrific genocide, and essentially during the Holocaust, it was under the Nazi government of Germany, as well as their conquered territories, in which they believed that people who were considered inferior, and as they called it, inhuman, so for example, Jewish people, gypsies, communists, political enemies of the state, homosexuals, anyone who was deemed as someone who was not a citizen, who they deemed as not human, was sent to work in these labor camps, specifically in Dachau. Dachau, though, was different from other death camps, such as Treblinka and Birkenau, which is next to Auschwitz, in which they systematically killed people. Essentially, in the late 1930s, they began to transport thousands to millions of people to these various different camps through the Gestapo, or the Nazi police, as well as the SS. And specifically, Dachau was a labor camp, meaning that people here would be forced to work. Their main intention was to essentially build weaponry for the war, as well as even some general clothes and basic facilities such as herbs and other items which would be used by the country, as well as even from the surrounding city. But sadly, in many cases, because the intent was not just to get them to work, but to brutalize, dehumanize, and in the end, exterminate these millions of poor, innocent souls, essentially, much of the work, some of the work they did, as can be seen, not so much in the visiting area, but in some of the back walls, behind the walls here, were essentially just laborious tasks that weren't really of any use, just chipping hot rocks in the sun and cultivating herbs that would never be used, simply as a way to humiliate and essentially dehumanize, as well as inflict torture on these poor, innocent people. Essentially, it is projected that over 40,000 people lost their lives in these camps, and those are only organized exterminations, which happened because the people either became too weak or because of overcrowding, which happened extremely in the late 1940s as the war essentially began to come to a close, and they wanted to exterminate as many people as possible to cover up the horrific war crimes that they committed here. Essentially, that number, 40,000, was only the official registered people who were executed by hanging in the execution centers near the cremation centers, and in the crematorium, people who were also gassed. Essentially, mass executions did not officially occur in the gas chambers on record, but many testimonies from Holocaust survivors, ex-SS officials who worked here, as well as some kind of excavations here, have shown that there were many executions that occurred in the gas chambers. These buildings here were essentially modern museums, but were also the medical centers where they sadly performed horrible experiments on many of the prisoners here, as well as centers of main administrative areas where the people and the guards worked and were stationed, while the barracks where the prisoners and the inmates were held were essentially behind them in this direction. And while you can only see one, which is the one that was preserved as means to look as an example of what these barracks were, what they looked like in their state, and the horrific conditions that were here, you can see a bit. There are some rock leftovers on the side that go for rows and rows and rows ahead. And those, on those rock foundations, were dozens and dozens of these barracks, where originally it was designed to hold about 200 souls, but during the overcrowding period in the mid-1940s, they housed as many as 2,000 in each of the barracks, which, as you can imagine, had horrible conditions. And to remember, the guards here put almost insane, impossible pressure on the inmates here, to a point where extreme cleanliness, even an extreme positive mood, as well as almost unacquiesceable demands that they gave to the inmates here were pressured upon the prisoners, and with that overcrowding and that lack of cleanliness, many of these were impossible to fulfill, and so horrible punishments were inflicted upon many of the people who were put here. Essentially, this entire concentration camp was made into a memorial which I'm visiting now and can be visited today. And the Holocaust overall was a horrific example of how extreme radicalization and bigotry can be used by a population, specifically by an oppressive force, as a means of extracting capital, as a means of extracting power, and as a means of simply justifying some kind of cultural or social goal or norm. And it's important, especially today, with many aspects of racism, violence, destruction, and some forms of underlying bigotry, that we understand to the full extent one of the most horrifying genocides of all time, so that we can ensure that it never happens again. Because history always repeats itself, especially if it is ignored. Therefore, it is absolutely important, it is imperative that people understand exactly what happened and to what extent. And therefore, that's why it's so important to visit places like this, as the Holocaust, although it was statistically considered to be the worst genocide of all time, it was extremely brutal and horrific, especially if you go into the full details of it. It was only one of many genocides that have occurred from history, ranging from the Armenian genocide, the Cambodian or Khmer Rouge genocide, to even many genocides that have occurred that might not be considered genocides through warfare and through prison camps throughout various different areas. It's important to understand that genocide is a serious problem, and understanding this one is an example of how they can be so devastating.